The doctor at the gate. The unconscious child and the 5-year lie. He just wanted to understand the commotion at the hospital entrance. But when he saw his ex-fiancée on her knees, screaming for help with an unconscious child in her arms, he knew that boy carried a secret capable of destroying everything he believed about her and about himself. This is the story of the most shocking paternity reveal in medical history. If this story touches you, like it now and subscribe to follow. Every chapter, Part 1, The Scene at the Gate. The late afternoon in Manhattan fell like a dense, suffocating wave over the mirrored buildings of Park Avenue, where the Sterling Clinic, a beacon among the elite, raised its clean glass facade like a monument to exclusivity. At that hour, the white lights of the lobby should reflect the discreet elegance of quiet patients, lawyers with gold watches, and mothers with uniformed nannies, but not today. That afternoon, everything was out of place. A strange sound echoed between the polished walls of the hall, raised voices, ignored pleas, the insistent pushing of someone who wouldn't accept no. Outside, where the daylight still hurt the eyes, a woman on her knees was imploring for help. Her arms trembled under the weight of an inert, unresponsive child who swayed with the fragility of someone struggling to breathe. "Please, please, he passed out. Is he dying?" Her voice was raw, desperate, the kind of cry that captures everyone's attention, except those who worked there. 2 security guards held their arms out, blocking the entrance as if confronting a threat, not a mother in a panic. One of them spoke without emotion, like reciting something for the 1,000th time. "Ma'am, this is a private clinic. There is no registration in the system. We cannot authorize entry without an appointment." She couldn't hear, or she heard, but didn't understand. She only held the child tighter, shaking him slowly as if the movement could bring back what was already leaving. The child's head fell back, his mouth slightly open, his eyes half closed and dull. She tried to stand, stumbled, slipped. She fell again, her knees already weak, her clothes stuck to her body with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead, her breathing made of sharp sobs. The surrounding crowd watched, some with pity, others with haste, all at a comfortable distance from those who don't want to get involved. My son won't make it to the public hospital." One more attempt, one more refusal. The phrases repeated with the coldness of an institutional script. Attention only with authorization. The clinic system is restricted. Emergencies only through the public network. The child did not move. And then, the sound of sudden screeching brakes. A black luxury car stopped abruptly at the entrance. Dark windows, engine still roaring. The door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out, his strides decisive, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. Dr. Julian Vance, the chief physician, the owner, the name behind every wall of that building, known for his clinical precision, his calculated distance, and his reputation for never, ever getting personally involved. He didn't even need to raise his voice. His mere presence made the guards step back. The silence that followed was harder than the screams. What confusion is this at my door? Only then did he see her. The woman's body, the child in her arms, the desperation etched into her skin. And he froze. Time didn't stop, but it seemed to slow down. Because there, on her knees on the pavement, dirty, breathless, desperate, was Amelia. The woman he knew like himself. The woman who disappeared without explanation. The woman he never forgave and never forgot. Her eyes slowly lifted, like someone afraid of what they will see. His eyes wavered, as if something inside his chest had come loose, falling to the bottom. The crowd fell into total silence, as if understanding that this was not just another emergency scene. There was something personal, intense, ancient, and unresolved. They both stood there, looking at each other for seconds that couldn't be measured on a clock. But amidst all the rage, the surprise, and the pain, something inside him stirred. The child in her arms, the pale face, the too light body, the absence of response. Julian still said nothing. But anyone who knew him, even from afar, knew one thing. Behind all the coldness, the reputation as a ruthless man, the strict protocols, children were always Julian's weak spot. Part 2. The clinical urgency. The silence that fell between the woman's cry and Julian's paralyzed gaze seemed solid. The voices around them became distant murmurs, as if the world had drowned in thick water, and only he could still breathe. His eyes fixed on the child, then on her, then on the child again. Memory, treacherous, cruel, brought an almost painful flash. Amelia laughing on an old afternoon, her face sweaty after running on the beach, saying that someday she wanted to have a son with his eyes. Julian blinked, cutting the thought as if with a razor. There was no space for remembering now. There was a child in her arms, and he was dying. Julian knelt on the cold pavement with the same precision as someone entering an operating room. He put his fingers on the child's neck. The skin was icy, the forehead burning. The pulse, weak, erratic, almost absent. Purplish spots on the neck, he muttered, more to himself than to Amelia. Irregular breathing, pressure, almost zero. His tone changed in an instant. He's going into sepsis. Immediate attention needed. Clear the way. One of the nurses hesitated. Doctor, she has no record. The system doesn't allow. I give the orders here. Move the system or find another job. The hallway opened like a dammed river. Julian entered with the child in his arms, walking firmly, his back already sweaty beneath his coat. Amelia tried to follow, but she was held back by a nurse. Ma'am, you must wait. The room is restricted access. But he's my son. Julian didn't turn back. But he listened, and with every step he took away from her, he felt as if he were walking away from something he couldn't name. Inside the emergency room, the atmosphere was like a war zone. Teams activating, voices overlapping, the rhythmic sound of the heart monitor already alerting. Fever 104 degrees, pressure dropping, saturation falling, someone said. Julian took control without hesitation. Blood draw, blood culture started. Begin broad-spectrum antibiotics. Fluid therapy now. Lower temperature. Continuous monitoring. Prepare transfer to ICU as soon as he stabilizes. There was something in his tone that allowed for no mistakes, no doubts. The team, although accustomed to his authority, perceived the difference. This urgency was not just clinical. It was personal. Julian did not take his eyes off the child for a second, as if wanting to engrave every detail of that small, tired face into his memory. An hour later, the monitor stabilized. The fever began to yield. The skin regained some color, but the body still did not react. He was far from out of danger, and everyone there knew it. Julian walked out of the room without a word. He sent for Amelia. She entered with her shoulders slumped, her face stained with dry tears, her eyes searching his for any sign of hope. The consultation room was dim, with only the indirect light of the corner lamp turned on. Julian stood, his back to her, looking out the window as if the world out there could answer what he was feeling. Your son is alive. She covered her mouth with both hands. But he's not out of danger fully. He entered an initial state of sepsis. His system began failing due to an untreated infection. She started to stammer. I gave him medicine. I tried to bring the fever down. I thought it was just a virus, Julian. You should have brought him sooner, he cut her off, his voice too firm. I don't have money for a private clinic. Julian turned around. His gaze was hard, but there was an almost invisible trace of something even he didn't understand. For a second they stood there, face to face, like two strangers with a past turned to ruins between them. He's in the ICU, stable, but under continuous observation. Protocol does not allow visits for now. Please, her voice broke, and Amelia had to lean against the wall. I need to see my son. He breathed deeply, looked down, then brought his eyes back to her. No. Any contact now could risk his recovery. The phrase came out dry, colder than he intended, but it was true. And yet, it hurt to see her almost collapse there in front of him. She took a deep breath, bit her lower lip. Dignity was all she still carried. Julian turned, pretending to be busy with papers on the table, but his fingers trembled slightly. The image of her holding that child still burned in his mind. The bill for the treatment here is high, he said, almost without emotion. Very high. She didn't answer immediately. She only brought her hand to her chest, as if something was sinking there. Her gaze was lost, like someone expecting to hear anything else. I don't have money, she finally said. I'll do anything. Just save my son. Julian clenched his fists. That cut deep. Anything. He heard that same phrase in another era, in another context, and this time, a real child was at stake. But he let instinct yield to pride, and wounded pride spoke for him. After everything, after betraying me, you still have the nerve to bring another man's child here, asking me to save him? Amelia closed her eyes tightly, as if she didn't want to hear that again, as if she didn't have the strength to explain, defend herself. Yes, I just want to save my son. Silence. Julian looked at the floor. Then, he looked at her, with the same coldness he used with patients who already knew they were going to die. You'll work here. She looked up, confused. In housekeeping. You start tomorrow, at 6 a.m. Amelia blinked. Her mouth opened for a second, as if to protest. But nothing came out. She only nodded, low, swallowing the pain with a knot in her throat. I accept. And she walked out of the consultation room like someone who had just sold their soul, without looking back, without screaming, without drama. Julian stood still, motionless, looking at the closed door. The sound of the click echoed like a warning. And although he tried to think of any justification for what he had just done, the image of the unconscious child in his arms would not leave his mind. Why, no matter how hard he tried to deny it, children were always Julian's weak spot. Part 3. The surveillance. The rain began faintly, almost imperceptibly against the glass of the 7th floor. But for Julian, any external sound was just distant noise. On the monitor in front of him, Amelia slowly swept one of the internal corridors, her body bent forward, as if the broom was more alive than she was. It was just after 3 p.m., and he had already seen her sweep, scrub the floor of the surgical wing, collect hospital waste from the isolation block, and carry bags twice her own size. He asked the supervisor to be hard on her. No quarter given, he had said, as if trying to measure how much she could take. But not even he knew if it was punishment, rage, or a blind attempt to understand the extent of this woman who, even now, seemed to be carrying a guilt greater than his own. Amelia didn't complain. She didn't ask for a break. She didn't eat lunch. She didn't look anyone in the eyes. Julian could see her bones starting to mark her skin. Her gait was getting shorter, and yet she didn't stop. It was as if, the more he tried to break her, the more she clung to the only thing she could still do: endure. Sir, she wouldn't stop for lunch again, the supervisor said that afternoon. I told her twice. She just kept scrubbing the floor of the dining hall. Julian didn't answer. He only nodded, cold, as if it didn't matter. But it did matter, because on the screen, he saw what he wouldn't admit to feeling, that something was wrong. And it wasn't with her. It was with him. What game does she think she's playing? He thought, leaning back in his chair. Is she trying to prove she's not weak, that she regrets, or just that she won't give up on her son? But deep down, Julian knew. She had already lost everything. And now she only had one thing: the child. And she wouldn't leave here while he was still lying in the ICU. The day ended with the smell of ether and accumulated tiredness in the air. The back corridor was nearly empty. Patients settled, the noises reduced to the sound of gurney wheels on the waxed floor. Julian, back in his office, scanned the cameras one last time, already without real interest. He was about to turn them off when he saw it. She stumbled, slowly at first, like someone whose legs are giving out. Then, suddenly, as if her body no longer had the strength for even that, Amelia fell without her hands reaching out for support, as if she no longer had the strength for even that. The bucket overturned. The dirty water ran across the tiles. She lay still for a few seconds. And then, nothing. Julian left the room before he knew he was getting up. He crossed corridors, ignored the elevator, took the stairs. His feet pounded the steps as if in a hurry to understand. He reached the scene before any nurse. Amelia was unconscious, her hair stuck to her forehead, her face pale, her lips too dry for someone who had been active all day. Julian knelt beside her, and for the first time in a long time, he touched her with an urgency that wasn't just clinical. It was human. Amelia. His voice came out lower than he expected. She didn't respond. Her pulse was fast but irregular. Her hands were cold, her breathing shallow. "I need a gurney here, now," he shouted. "Emergency! Fall with loss of consciousness!" She was rushed to the examination area without opening her eyes. Julian stayed nearby, standing, his fists clenched, while the doctors executed the protocol. The lights in the assessment room flickered, the monitors hummed softly, and the resident's voice filled the reports with terms that, even for him, hurt to hear. Severe anemia, clear signs of malnutrition, extreme muscle weakness, high stress, insomnia, indicative of prolonged fasting and low caloric intake. Julian gritted his teeth, because there was the woman he thought he knew, who he swore had betrayed him, who he had hated with all his strength, and who now, before him, was fainting from hunger. Amelia woke up shortly after, her eyelids heavy and her vision blurred. Her arms were hooked up to IV drips, the smell of hospital alcohol invading her nose. She tried to sit up but couldn't. Julian was there, sitting next to her, in scrubs, but with his shoulders slumped lower than ever. She frowned, trying to speak, but her dry throat wouldn't allow it. "Stay still," he said. "Turned low but firm. You had a collapse." She turned her face the other way. "I'm fine," she murmured. Julian let out a brief, humorless laugh. "You have severe anemia, Amelia. You haven't been eating properly for days. You fainted cleaning a hospital floor. That is not fine." She closed her eyes. "I just need to know about my son. Is he better?" Julian hesitated. Then he answered directly. "He is stable, still in the ICU, responding to treatment." She nodded, eyes still closed. "Then I can go back. I have to—" "No," he cut her off. "You're going to rest, and you're going to eat, and you're going to understand that this is not a punishment." She opened her eyes again, with difficulty. "It's what it looks like. Every day here feels like a punishment." Julian fell silent. For a few seconds, only the sound of the IV dripping between them. He stood up, walked toward the door, but stopped before leaving. His hand on the frame, his body oriented toward the hallway, but his voice caught in his chest. I watched you. On the cameras. I ordered them to demand more from you. I ordered them to break you. And you didn't break. You just fainted. She said nothing. He turned, still not looking directly at her. You were hungry, and I only saw it when your body fell. That makes me a good doctor, but a terrible man. She breathed deeply, but didn't respond. Julian left, and for the first time in days, he didn't have the courage to return. But he couldn't stop thinking either, because now, more than ever, he was beginning to see what lay beneath his pride, the silence, the pain, and maybe, for the first time, he was also willing to hear what he never wanted to hear. Part 4. The truth he couldn't bear. He watched everything from behind the frosted glass of the observation room, as if the monitoring panel kept him safe from what he still couldn't name. He watched Amelia walk in silently, every day at the same time, sit beside the child with the delicacy of someone afraid of breaking what was already too fragile. Seeing her like that, reduced to the essential, just a mother, made something inside his chest yield. She didn't speak aloud. She touched her son's face with her thin fingers, slow kisses on the damp forehead, whispering words he couldn't hear, but felt, because the tone was the same one she once used with him, when they still shared the same bed, the same future, the same faith in something good. On the third day, Julian stopped watching from afar. He stood in the hallway when she walked out of the room. Amelia didn't see him at first. She walked with her eyes down, her hands clasped in front of her body, as if trying to maintain what little composure she had left. When she lifted her face, her gaze did not waver. There was no fear there anymore, just exhaustion. And something hard, thick, that Julian knew he himself had helped to form. She tried to pass. He blocked her path. "Wait!" Amelia stopped. Julian seemed about to say something but fell silent. His eyes quickly examined her, as if searching for signs of weakness, some detail that would allow him to retreat. But he found nothing. Julian began, swallowing hard. He reacted well to the visit. Saturation went up a bit. A child needs his mother. Her voice was low, firm, without sweetness. Rodrigo nodded. They stood there for seconds too long. She made a move to continue. Julian blocked the way again. "We need to talk. We have nothing left to talk about, Julian." "Yes, we do." "Since the day you disappeared." Amelia took a deep breath. "I didn't disappear. You erased me." Julian took a step closer. She didn't retreat. "Are you still pretending innocence? I didn't want it to come out this way, but it did, as it always did." She smiled, brief, humorless. "You know nothing." And then the floor opened up. The past exploded in the white hospital corridor, as if it had always been there, just waiting for oxygen. "Stop running. Stop accusing me. You know what I saw. And you know what you chose to believe." Julian felt his whole body tremble. She did too. But neither yielded. "Do you want the truth?" she shouted, her voice cutting the aseptic silence around them. "You wouldn't be able to handle it." Julian didn't answer. His gaze burned. His hands were clenched, as if trying to hold on to something that had been slipping away for years. He moved closer, close enough to feel her breath fail. The tension between the two was thick, dirty, like damned mud. "Then tell me now. What wouldn't I be able to handle?" She closed her eyes for a second, breathed deeply. When she opened them, they were wet, but not fragile. "That child is your son." The world stopped. Julian blinked, as if he had received a blow he hadn't seen coming. "What?" "I was pregnant with twins. When you threw me out of your life, when you called me a liar, a gold digger, everything you wanted to believe, I was already carrying both of them. He took a step back. He was breathless. The other one, her voice failed for the first time. The other one didn't survive. Silence. Julian tried to breathe, but his chest wouldn't obey. I buried a baby alone, she continued. While you called me a traitor, while your mother humiliated me, while you erased my existence from your life. Stop, Julian murmured, almost voiceless. You never wanted to listen. You never asked. You never doubted what they told you. He shook his head, as if trying to piece things together. How did you never tell me? She laughed. Sad. Hurt. I tried. I wrote you, I called, I sent messages, but you had already decided. You already had your judgment made. You had already condemned me, so I stopped trying, because you didn't want the truth. You wanted your version of it. Julian covered his face with his hands. His fingers pressed hard against his eyes. The world spun slow, heavy. A strange nausea rose in his throat. This can't be. Does it hurt? She interrupted. Good, because I felt that pain every day since I buried my son. Alone. On a cold morning in borrowed clothes with a death certificate in my hand. Julian lifted his eyes. They were red, wet, but his face still tried to hold firm. She looked away, like someone who has said everything. I don't want your forgiveness, Julian. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. Because now you're going to have to look at him every day and know that you were the one who walked away, not me. Julian couldn't respond. Her every word weighed like a sentence, like a verdict he didn't know how to reverse. He turned his body and walked away quickly, as if running from that hallway was the only way not to collapse right there. He passed nurses and technicians without seeing anyone. The walls seemed to squeeze him, the ceiling lower, the muffled sound of his own heart beating in his ears like a drum. He entered the staff lounge, locked the door, leaned against the cold wall. His legs gave way. He slid to the floor, his back against the tile. He breathed like someone fighting off a drowning. And maybe, in a way, he really was drowning. Not in pain, but in the truth. And that he never knew how to treat. Part 5. The paternity test and the new command. The early morning had no end. Julian remained in the dark office, seated in the furthest corner of the room, lights off, eyes fixed on an arbitrary point between the floor and the abyss growing inside him. The digital clock ticked away the hours, as if mocking his insomnia. 2 digital hands, blinking unhurriedly, uncompassionately. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't run. Amelia's words reverberated like a perverse echo, penetrating the walls, hitting the windows, scratching his consciousness like nails on glass. That child is your son. I was pregnant with twins. I buried a baby alone, while you called me a traitor. Julian had faced 20-hour heart surgeries, irreversible losses in emergency rooms, bodies collapsing that imploded in his hands. But no pain, none, compared to that truth thrown into his lap like a sudden grenade. Even so, even faced with what she said with glassy eyes and a broken voice, a part of him resisted. He doubted. He distrusted, like someone who has been deceived too many times. He no longer trusted his own judgment. He didn't trust her. And deep down, he didn't even trust himself. That's why, when the hospital calmed down, when the hallways were empty, when the midnight nurses took their posts with light steps and trained silence, Julian acted. He entered the ICU soundlessly. The child was sleeping, his body still fragile, but vital signs stable. There was color in his cheeks now, regular breathing, a trace of life where there had only been urgency. Julian stopped in front of the bed and watched him for a few seconds. The boy had a small band-aid at the base of his neck where the IV access had been placed. And, even asleep, he frowned as if still confronting the world in dreams. Julian breathed deeply, swallowed hard. With gloves, delicacy, and the care of someone who has done this for decades, he took a sterile swab, gently ran it over the inner cheek mucosa of the child, and placed the material in a sealed envelope. Then, he collected a loose hair from the pillow and added it to the genetic material. He did everything without his hands shaking. But his heart, that seemed about to crumble inside his chest. He left the ICU with the same silence with which he entered. He delivered the sample to a private lab with a direct order. Maximum priority. Confidential result. In less than 2 hours. And then he waited. The day dawned without color. Julian spent the entire shift working on automatic. He examined patients, signed reports, corrected a security protocol in the surgical wing. No one noticed he was in pieces. He learned all his life to appear whole. That was what men like him did. The ones who commanded, the ones who decided, the ones who saved. But no one taught what to do when the one who needed saving was you. At dusk, the notification arrived. The envelope was delivered by a lab employee. Sealed, closed with biometric identification. Julian took it straight to his office, locked the door, and sat alone at his desk. He stared at the name on the top of the envelope for a few minutes. His, the child's, Amelia did not appear anywhere, as if this were a pact between two strangers with the same blood. He opened it slowly, read with blurry vision. The report was brief, technical, cold, almost cruel in its accuracy. Result: 99.9% genetic compatibility. Conclusion: paternity confirmed with the maximum degree of certainty. Julian let the paper slide from his hands. His body leaned slightly back. The chair groaned under the weight of a man carrying more than he could. He closed his eyes, and the sound that escaped his mouth was not a sigh. It was a sob. The first in years. He contained the crying hard, like someone still trying to resist until the end. But the truth had pierced something too deep to hold. He stood up, walked around the room, ran his hand through his hair, rubbed his face with rage. He wanted to break something. He wanted to go back in time. He wanted to scream the child's name until his throat tore. But the only thing he managed to say was in a whisper, almost childlike, almost broken. "I abandoned my son." The words didn't feel real until he repeated them. Once, twice, 3 times. "I abandoned my son," as if trying to punish himself with his own sentence. There was no more doubt. There was no more excuse. That child was his. And he wasn't there. Not for the first steps. Not for the first fever. Not for the birthday. Not for the day his brother died. Not for his mother, while she buried half her soul in a coffin too small to accept it. Julian sat down again, his face in his hands. The pride, the fear, the rage, everything seemed small now compared to what he had just discovered. Because for the first time, he understood that it wasn't just the pain of loss he was feeling. It was guilt. And perhaps, only perhaps, the truth had always been quieter than the lie. He just chose to listen to the wrong scream. It wasn't enough to know the child was his son. Now, he needed to know how all this happened, and why. Who lied? Who manipulated? Who concealed? He stood up slowly. His eyes passed over the hospital cameras one by one, as if looking for a specific face. But what he was looking for was not on any screen. The truth was buried in a past he himself helped to kill. And now, It was time to unearth everything, even if it hurt like surgery without anesthesia. Part 6. The Confession and the New Vow. Julian spent the night excavating the past with the precision of a surgeon and the obsession of a man who knew his life had been built on rubble. There was no more room for doubt. The DNA had already screamed the truth he pretended not to hear. Now, he needed to know who had lied to him and why. Sitting in front of 3 monitors, the lights off, his breath held, he accessed old conversations he swore he had forgotten. He retrieved backups from years ago, folders buried in almost abandoned emails, deleted records from the old cell phone stored in a drawer at the back of the closet. Every click was an incision. Every line, a wound reopening. It was like tearing the scabs off a scar he never had the courage to face. There were dates that didn't match, messages that ended abruptly, a request for a meeting he never answered, an email Amelia claimed to have sent days after the fight, which never reached him. In the spam folder, he found truncated copies, traces of manipulated files. One of them with a photo. Amelia, lying next to a man. A pixelated image. The same one he used years ago as justification for turning his back. But now, zooming in on the image with forensic filters from the hospital's software, Julian saw it clearly. The photo was a montage. The shadows didn't match. The texture was incompatible with the camera model she used at the time. And the cruelest part, the man's face had been overlaid with rudimentary artificial intelligence, but enough to fool a wounded heart. It was fake. All of it. What hurt the most wasn't realizing he had been wrong. It was realizing how much he wanted to believe the lie. Because the truth demanded something he didn't have back then. Courage to confront his mother. The tracing of the unknown number that sent messages with proof of the supposed betrayal took only minutes. The prepaid line, registered in third-party names, was connected via an IP address detour. But Julian was not just anyone, and he also didn't have patience for limits. He used the hospital's confidential access to the digital security database to identify the point of origin, an apartment in the Upper East Side. His mother's address. The ground did not move. But what shattered inside him was greater than any earthquake. He left the hospital as if the night weighed less than his own soul. He took the car without thinking. He drove through streets he had known since childhood, but which now felt alien. His mother's building looked the same, imposing facade, aligned flowers, cordial doorman. He didn't speak to anyone. He went straight up. The door opened before he could ring the bell. As if she knew. As if she was waiting for him. "Son," she said, with the sweet tone she always used when she wanted to soften things before they bled. Julian didn't answer. He walked in. The house smelled of expensive perfume and silence. She tried to smile. He didn't allow it. "I was the one who made the letter disappear, yes," she said, before he asked. "That envelope that arrived at the clinic months after the breakup. I opened it. I read it. Who writes letters these days, Julian? She wanted to trap you with pity." He remained standing, in the same spot. "I was the one who sent you that photo too, and the video. I had no choice." "You had no choice? I am your mother. I lied to you. You made me believe she was cheating, that she was an opportunist, and I believed you. Because she was. She was pregnant with my children. You made me abandon my own son." His voice cracked at the end. The lump in his throat wouldn't yield. She tried to approach. He stepped back. "I did what was best for you, Julian. She wasn't from our circle. She was an unstable woman, too emotional. She was going to drag you into a life that didn't suit you. You had a brilliant career. I wasn't going to let you ruin everything for an unplanned pregnancy with some common girl. She wasn't some common girl. She was pregnant with my children. And you weren't there either. You were blind. crazy with love. You needed someone to save you from yourself. You destroyed my life! I saved your reputation. I would have preferred to lose everything than lose my son. She fell silent. Julian walked around the room, his eyes sweeping over the childhood photos, the ceremony picture frames, the diplomas on the wall. A life designed like a display case. Everything in its place. Everything perfect. Everything false. He turned his eyes back to her, and he no longer saw his mother. He saw the woman who controlled every step he took since he learned to walk. He saw the invisible hand that always pulled the strings while he thought he was free. You will never again command my life, Mother. Never again. He walked toward the door. She followed him with her gaze but did not try to stop him. No tears. No protests. Just the silence of someone who, for the first time, understood that her son was no longer a moldable child. Julian left the apartment without looking back. On the street, the air was cold, but it felt lighter than it had in days. He breathed deeply, as if he could cleanse his lungs of all the years lived in silence. He got into the car, started the engine. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but for the first time, he had a direction. Because now, he knew what he had to do. Perhaps it wasn't possible to undo the past, but he could still try to fix what was left, even if it cost him everything. Even if it hurt like surgery without anesthesia. Part 7. The Redemption of Presence. Meaningful ending. Julian began to walk slower through the hospital corridors. He avoided making noise with his shoes. He didn't want to be noticed, or feared, or pointed at, as the ruthless doctor he always was. Now, he preferred the shadow of the office, the silence between shifts, the space where guilt fit better than authority. He was relearning how to inhabit his own hospital. He had discovered a world in there that he didn't see before, the world of waiting, of nameless pain, of those who sit on the floor outside the ICU, holding their badge with trembling hands, as Amelia did night after night. It was a world without control, without a scalpel, without a solution. And it was where he bled the most now. She remained distant, cordial when necessary, but cold. She didn't use unnecessary words. She responded with gestures, avoiding eye contact. And although he might attempt some gesture of care, Amelia kept her walls high, because she knew that gestures are not enough when what was broken was not just the heart, but all trust. The attempt in the dining hall was the first setback. Julian sat across from her, unannounced, like someone trying to make something simple possible. "May I?" She looked at him briefly, then returned her gaze to her plate. She picked up the tray and stood up, as if he weren't there. She walked to the sink, left the cutlery, and walked out of the room with the same firm stride she used to carry her pain. Julian was left static, his hands clenched on the table. He only heard the sound of the chair moving, and then, nothing. He swallowed hard, and with that, he swallowed the shame he always disguised with arrogance. For the first time, he tasted it, and it hurt, because it was bitter, because it came late, because it was no longer enough. The next day he sent some things, new clothes, a decent pair of sneakers, a functional phone. He didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but it was all he knew how to do, to care like a doctor, not like a man. And deep down, perhaps he still confused the two. In the afternoon, she walked into his office without knocking. She walked to the desk, threw the packages down forcefully, and stood in front of him. "Do you think you can buy my pain, Julian?" Her voice wasn't shouted. It was embedded. He looked at her, defenseless. "No, then what is this? It's the only thing I know how to do. When someone is hurt, I try to care. I don't know any other way to show that I care." She looked at him for a time long enough to make him uncomfortable, but she didn't reply. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply turned and walked out of the office. On the third day, Julian disappeared. He left the hospital without warning, turned off his cell phone for hours, something he never did. When he returned, he was different. His eyes were red, his skin paler, his posture less erect. "Where were you?" a nurse asked. He didn't answer. He just walked down the hallway to the ICU area. He stopped in front of the glass, looked at the sleeping boy. Then he went to the staff lounge, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there until the end of his shift. When night fell and the hospital was silent, he approached Amelia in the hallway. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the cold wall, her shoulders slumped, her hands empty in her lap. Her eyes were sunken, no makeup, defenseless. Julian sat down beside her without saying anything. They were silent for a few minutes, listening to the cardiac monitors sound muffled through the wall. "You were alone," he finally said. "Pregnant. And when everything fell apart, I left." She didn't answer. "You buried a son while I called you a traitor." His voice broke. She closed her eyes, clenched her fists. Julian cried, truly, without disguise, without restraint. The tears fell heavy, shamelessly, as if he no longer knew how to stop them. "You have every right to hate me, Amelia, but I needed you to know I'm not going to run away again." She didn't say anything, but she didn't pull away either. The next day, the boy was better. When they walked out of the ICU together, the hallway was quiet, and there was a silence between them that wasn't heavy, just suspended. Julian gently touched her shoulder, like someone who wants to thank without words. She turned slightly. He instinctively moved closer. She pulled away. "Not yet." Julian nodded. "It's okay. I just want you nearby when you're ready." The days followed, and Julian learned to wait. He didn't force conversation. He appeared at improbable hours just to watch her pass by from a distance. He asked the nurses how she was, but always naturally, as if it were only clinical interest. He never let her know. When he saw her in the hallway, he smiled carefully. Sometimes she didn't respond. Sometimes she pretended not to see him. He smiled anyway. Sometimes he cried alone. In the office, in the car, in the empty elevator. He cried when he saw the boy's backpack resting on the armchair in the ICU. He cried when he remembered the name he never knew existed. He cried when he remembered the letter he never received. And he cried, above all, for knowing that loving after destruction demands a kind of strength that no one teaches. One afternoon, at the end of a shift, Amelia was in the hallway of the pediatric area. She was arranging a cleaning cart near the entrance to a room. Julian was a few feet ahead, leaning over a child's gurney, helping a small patient pick up the toys that had fallen on the floor. The child laughed. Julian made faces. It was a simple scene. Natural. Amelia watched without being seen, and she smiled. For a second. Then she hid it. She went back to work. But the crack in the wall was open, and behind the armor, there was still a woman who once believed in love. And maybe still believed. But believing was not the same as trusting. Not after everything. Amelia knew it. She knew that what she felt for Julian now didn't come from the same place as before. It wasn't light, or blind, or innocent. It came from the ground. It came from the pain she carried alone, from the days she cried in secret so as not to scare her son, from the nights when the cold was less cruel than the loneliness. But it was also true that when he said, "I am your father," something inside her broke in a strange way. It didn't hurt. It didn't cause anger. It broke like a bone that, finally, aligns. Because hearing that from Julian's mouth, seeing the child collapse onto his chest, feeling that the hug was sincere, that healed, slowly, like everything truly worthwhile. That night, after the crying, the hugs, the peace that silently settled into the simple room, Julian stayed longer than usual. Amelia didn't ask him to stay. She also didn't say he could leave. They simply lay down together, the three of them, each in a corner of the bed, with the sound of the fan turning low, and the boy asleep in the middle, between the two. Julian watched him sleep. The child's features were the same ones he saw in the mirror. The shape of the chin, the line of the eyebrows, even the way his fingers moved involuntarily when falling asleep. It was like seeing a part of himself he didn't even know existed. A small, vulnerable version, and yet stronger than he ever was. Amelia watched him too. Every now and then, she turned her face toward Julian, like someone checking if he was still there, if all of this wouldn't disappear at dawn. And it didn't disappear. In the days that followed, the house changed. Julian began to show up no longer with excuses, but with presence. He brought fresh bread in the morning, helped with the bills she couldn't pay. He fixed the leaky faucet. He changed the light bulb in the room. He didn't say much. He just did. He didn't try to rush things. He didn't invade her space. He slept on a mattress on the living room floor when he stayed late. Amelia still hesitated to call him back inside, but she no longer pushed him further away. One Saturday afternoon, the boy woke up from his nap and asked, "Daddy, are you going to disappear again?" Julian swallowed hard. "No, son, never again." "Promise?" "I promise." And the word didn't come out as just any promise. It came out as a decision tattooed on his chest. Later, in the park, Julian taught the boy to ride a bicycle. The first attempts were shaky. The little one complained, screamed, almost cried. Amelia, sitting on a nearby bench, watched with her arms crossed, but her gaze tender. Julian was patient. "Come on, champ. Fall, but get back up. Just like your dad. But I'm going to fall. Yes, but I'm holding you." And he held him for real. By the shirt, by the handlebar, by the waist, until the boy rode off alone, pedaling with fear and courage at the same time, shouting, "I'm going!" While Amelia disguised her tears behind sunglasses. Julian sat down next to her, exhausted and smiling. He has your heart. He insists on going even when scared. "No," she said. "He got that from you. I only learned to resist." Julian looked at her. He didn't reply. She noticed, and for the first time she took his hand in public. Days later, the boy returned to school. Julian insisted on taking him. New backpack on his back, uniform still smelling of soap. The boy walked hand in hand with both of them, as if it had always been like this. At the classroom door, he kissed Amelia on the cheek and hugged Julian tightly. "See you later, Daddy." Julian stood still for a few seconds after the boy entered, as if he was in shock at that word being said so naturally. "Daddy." When they returned home, Amelia invited him for lunch, for the first time, without hesitation, without excuses. At the table, the food was simple, but the silence between them was no longer awkward. It was full, dense, alive. Julian washed the dishes afterward. Amelia dried. "I didn't think you would make it." "Make what?" "Stay." He smiled. "Me neither. But now there's nowhere else I want to be." She looked down. She leaned on the counter and said, like someone who still doesn't believe what they feel, "I'm scared to believe." "Me too. And if we break again, we fix it. Together." Amelia breathed deeply. She didn't respond, but she smiled. Later, while the boy played on the living room floor, Julian watched them. They were whole. Still cracked, yes, but whole in what mattered. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't scream. It accompanied. Healing arrives slowly, but it arrives. The meaningful conclusion. The true second chance. This story of ultimate betrayal, redemption, and the raw power of unspoken love reminds us that true recovery is not found in forgetting the pain, but in confronting the truth and rebuilding trust one honest gesture at a time. Julian's greatest achievement was not becoming the chief physician, but learning humility and earning the right to be a father. Amelia's strength lay not in running away, but in choosing to believe the man Ethan became rather than the one he was. The new foundation for this family is built on shared vulnerability and the shared presence of a son who never stopped searching for the love that was always his. The final word, Daddy, spoken with a child's pure certainty, was the only true victory that mattered. If this story touched your heart, you have to leave your like right now. Comment below what part moved you the most. I read all the comments. And subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell because I have many more emotional stories coming. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video.